A lot of teachers think the problem with literacy centers is that their students just won't stay on task. But after 35 years of teaching, I've found that most center problems actually start long before kids ever rotate to a center. In this episode, I'm sharing 5 common mistakes teachers make when it comes to running centers and how to avoid them. So let's get started. The number one thing teachers do wrong when it comes to centers is starting them too soon. A lot of times teachers feel pressured by their administration or even other teachers to get straight into the curriculum and also to start small groups and centers. But the reality of the situation is that it takes time to get kids ready to work independently. It can take several weeks, even up to a month in first grade, before they're ready to go to a center and work on their own without interrupting you in small groups. And it can take even longer than that in kindergarten. So let me save you a lot of frustration and tell you that if your centers are falling apart in September, it's probably not because your kids are bad or the activities are too hard. It's probably because your kids haven't had enough practice yet. So the best thing you can do is slow down. Take your time when you're introducing centers, because when you do that and you really establish your rules and expectations, it's going to pay off in the long run. When you rush into centers, kids get into bad habits and they tend to interrupt you a lot during small groups. So even if it feels like you're wasting your time going slowly, it's worth it in the end. Okay, the second mistake teachers make with centers is not taking the time to model every single center. Sometimes we assume kids naturally know how to behave at the center or how to put things away, but they don't. Every kid comes from a different home and a different teacher the year before, and they all had different expectations. So you absolutely must take the time to model and demonstrate exactly how you want things done. You can actually begin to introduce centers to kids during the first week of school, but in a very gradual way. I always suggest introducing a very simple center to begin with. I liked having an art center in my classroom, and I usually opened that one first, and it was super simple. I might put some Play-Doh and cookie cutters at the center to start with, and that was it. So here's the step-by-step process of how you introduce centers. When it would normally be your small group time, choose 2 kids to demonstrate your first center. Give explicit directions to these 2 kids while the rest of the class listens. Tell them exactly what you expect, how to use the materials, how to clean up, everything you expect. And then tell those 2 kids to go ahead and work at the center. And while they're doing that, give the rest of the class something simple to do, like a coloring page or drawing at their tables. Then while those 2 kids are working at the center, you start praising them and saying stuff like, "Wow, I like how you're working silently," or "I love how you're cleaning up," stuff like that. And here's the best part. When you're praising the kids at the center, the rest of the class is listening because they really want to be the kids that are playing at the center. So even though they look busy coloring or whatever, they're listening and paying attention. So after about 10 minutes, call your class to the carpet and talk about what those 2 kids did that was right or wrong at the center. Work with your class to make a little rules chart for the center, maybe with 4 or 5 rules. And then the next day, you choose 2 different kids and you repeat the process again. 10 minutes at the center, the rest of the kids watch, meet at the carpet, and discuss the rules. By the 3rd day, you can introduce a brand new center. And again, something very simple. Maybe, this time it's the computer or listening center or something like that. You do it the same way. Show your class the expectations, be very specific. Let 2 kids try out that center, and then let 2 other kids go to that center that you already introduced. And then you go through that same process. Meet together, discuss what they did right and wrong, make a rules chart for the new center, and you just keep going in the same way until all the centers in your room have been introduced and you've given them very explicit instructions on how to use every center and all your expectations. I had 10 centers in my classroom, so you can see how this could take several weeks, but it really set the tone for what I expected during that time. After you have about half your centers introduced, you can pull a couple of random kids to work with you at small group while the other kids are practicing. You're not doing the formal lesson at this time. You're just sort of setting the stage for how you want your classroom to look during center time. And since it's not a real lesson in small group, you can intervene if you notice something going wrong at a center and get it straightened out right away. So introducing your centers slowly and very explicitly is a must. And even though it's going to take you a few weeks, it's so worth the time because you're really teaching your kids your expectations and your centers are going to run way more smoothly when you get started for real. Okay, so far we've talked about two mistakes: starting centers too soon and not modeling enough. And here's mistake number 3: making centers too hard or complicated. Remember, you have two main goals during center time. You want to have uninterrupted time with your small groups, and you want the rest of your class to be able to practice skills quietly and independently. That's the whole goal. So when you first introduce your centers, you want the activities at the centers to be simple and easy for kids to do on their own. So for instance, at the beginning of the year, your math center might just have a tub of Unifix cubes and a tub of pattern blocks. That's it. Very open-ended, no specific activity that the kids have to complete. So keeping your centers simple in the beginning is important. During this summer series, I'm going to be breaking down every center individually and talking about what to put at your centers and how to run each one of them. So be sure to come back every week to hear more specifics about every center. All right, the fourth mistake that teachers make with centers is making the transitions too complicated. There's lots of different ways that you can run centers, and I think I've probably tried all of them in my 35 years of teaching. I've done workboards and sign-in sheets and must-do, may-do, all the different things. But there was one method that worked the best for me, and making this decision probably eliminated 90% of the talking during center time. It wasn't complicated at all, and it was very simple for kids to follow, and it kept my classroom very quiet during small groups, which was my ultimate goal. So here's what I did. I only allowed one student at a time at a center. And you might be thinking, how in the world am I going to do that? And the reason that I could do that was because I had 10 centers in my room. So I could have 10 kids go to centers at one time, and they were each alone at their center. So there was literally nobody there for them to talk to. So my room was quiet. I usually had about 22, maybe 25 kids in my class. So I could have 10 kids at centers, usually about 5 with me at small group, and then that left the rest of the class. Some of those kids might go to Title I during that time, and then the rest of the kids would work in their interactive notebooks, or maybe they would do some silent reading from their individual book boxes during that time. It was usually about 15 to 20-minute increments for my small groups, and then when the kids were at centers. I usually met with 3 groups a day. So that's how we did it. We had no complicated workboards that we had to follow. There was no switching kids' names in the pocket chart or anything like that. I did have to keep some kind of system to keep kids from going to the same center over and over, because they're going to do that if you don't monitor it. So my kids had what we called their station log. The 10 centers were listed on the log with a little checkbox next to the picture of each center. And so when it was time to go to centers, the kids would take out their logs and choose a center. They had to choose a center that they hadn't been to yet, and nobody else could be there either. And then when we were all done with centers, all the kids came back to their seats and they would check off the center that they just went to on their log. And just to make sure everybody was being honest, I did what I called quick checks, and I would quickly walk around to make sure everybody checked off where they went that day. And if they had some kind of activity that they did, I just quickly glanced at that too. I was never worried about perfection. I just wanted to know that they had attempted to do the activity, and that was it. It was super simple, and about every 2 weeks, the kids would get a new log when they had visited every center, and they'd start all over again. Super simple and super uncomplicated. These logs are part of my Learning Centers management resource in my TPT store, and I'll put a link to that in the description so you can check it out. And that brings me to my last mistake that teachers make with centers, and that is focusing on perfection over independence. Literacy centers are for practice. Simple as that. You should always put activities at the centers that kids have already been introduced to in whole group. It gives them the opportunity to practice the skills, and it's just that, practice. So if they come back to their desk at the end of center time and they didn't get everything correct, that's okay, because it's just practice. If you notice a kid who's really struggling, you can call them up to your desk later in the day when you get an extra minute and review the skill. Otherwise, don't worry about it, because they're going to get more time to practice again in the days to come. Remember, the goal of literacy centers is to have your kids work quietly and independently while you are in small groups, and it gives kids time to practice. So don't overcomplicate it by trying to grade their work or insist that they finish the work at centers before they can move on to something else. It's just practice. So if your center time feels a little chaotic or noisy, it doesn't mean you're doing a bad job. Most of the time, kids just need more modeling, more practice, and a simpler routine. Next week, I'll be talking about setting up your classroom library, so be sure to come back for that. If you enjoyed this episode, give it a thumbs up and be sure to hit follow so you don't miss any episodes. And until next week, remember to make learning feel like play, and I'll talk to you soon.